And then I realized I was not cut out for government. So the thing about
Interesting.
government is you are executing what somebody else's policy is. And I wanted to be the one setting the policy. I wanted to be the one driving it.
Welcome to Confessions of a Vistage Chair. I'm your host, Ryan Hogan. We have real, behind-the-scenes conversations with Vistage Chairs who share honest stories and practical insights on leadership growth, peer advisory groups, and what actually happens in Vistage meetings. Let's pull back the curtain. Julie, thank you so much for taking the time to jump on. I was looking at your background. I was looking at some of the notes, and like you have like a really impressive journey in all of this.
Okay. All
All right, well,
right.
let's start. Actually, one side note question before we jump into some of the details. When you went to Hopkins, were you actually in Baltimore for that?
No, that was actually in DC. The School of Advanced International Studies is in Washington, DC.
Okay,
Used to be on Mass Ave, and it's now gone right downtown. I think it's on Pennsylvania. It's on Pennsylvania Avenue now. So
interesting. How did this all? I'm from Baltimore. That was the only reason I had to ask that question. And
I hear it in your voice, actually, Baltimore.
Baltimore. And I haven't been to Baltimore, I mean, I'm frequently there, but I haven't lived there since I was 17 because the Navy has taken me all over the place, the world, the country. Um, okay, so like let's start with this. How did you get into this? Like when growing up, were you like, you know what, like international business and relationships and all of this sounds like an amazing career, or did you just fall into it? Like how did this happen?
So, as a kid, I was really interested in alternative education systems. I was one of those kids who was always in the front lines protesting against anything that was the status quo.
Love it.
Whether it was how we were required to do 4 years of gym in high school, and I wanted to graduate early, or that whatever, or it was that certain companies were dumping effluent into Lake Michigan because I grew up outside Chicago, and so there were business people who were associates of my father's who were from Hong Kong, and they came to visit the house. And I remember talking with them, and they were explaining to me the education system in Hong Kong. And I thought, well, that's cool. It's really different than what we do here. And so I was interested in it. So, on a total lark, when I went to college, I decided I was going to take Chinese. And, the crazy thing is they were describing the British system to me. So, go
Yep.
figure. But once I started studying the language, I loved it. I mean, it's one of those things, you're either off or you're on. I mean, it's cumulative. So you either get it and you keep learning, or you go do something else. And I just love the characters. I love the art of it. And I was sitting in Poughkeepsie, New York, studying Chinese, and realized that I probably wasn't going to get proficient doing it there. And so this is, long ago and far away. So I went to Taiwan to study and spent a year studying there and backpacking through Southeast Asia. And I was an anthropology major in college, so I just assumed I was going to go to grad school, and I applied, and I came back from backpacking through Southeast Asia and realized I did not want to do what anthropologists do, which is write and teach. And so I did a pivot, and an advisor of mine suggested that I might try international relations since I had the language, since Chinese language at that time was not typical. So I was very grateful. I was applied and got into grad school, and the rest is history because I was in Washington, D.C., right in the center of everything that was going on. And this was in the 1970s. I hate to date myself, but it's true. And as you may know, that was when Nixon and Kissinger went to China, and then Jimmy Carter signed agreements with Deng Xiaoping in 1978. And so I was coming out of grad school right when there was the opening of diplomatic relations with China. And
Hmm.
I was in the right place at the right time. And I was really lucky. I got a job um, it was at the UN in New York, working on some of those early U.S. China agreements for um, a nonprofit called the National Committee on U.S. China Relations, which was the group that did the ping pong exchange. So right place, right time, super lucky. Um,
That's incredible.
yeah.
There wasn't really precedent in any of this, and obviously, like you were ingrained in the culture, and you had spent time studying in Taiwan. Like, what was that like from that point of like kind of uncharted territory and trying to put together agreements and like the balance that comes with the cultures and everything else?
I mean, for me, it was, in many ways it was magical. I mean, I did my undergraduate thesis was on the role of Chinese women in educating their children, which is a very Confucian idea. So I had been seeped in historic and cultural, China. And communist China is quite different place, but the people still have that same background. And
Hmm.
so the first trip I went to China was in 1978, and it was a student group we had put together through Johns Hopkins, through SAIS. We were there at the invitation of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And, it was just fascinating to see this country, which was so different in the way it represented itself at that point than I could have imagined. And it was truly a developing country. I mean, what I've seen in terms of China's development in my lifetime is unbelievable in every sense of the word. I remember the first time I was there walking down the main shopping street in Beijing called Wangfujing, and there was the number one department store, and it had these huge, big, blue, heavy, padded uh, things in the front door so that the wind wouldn't get in, so it wouldn't get cold inside because things weren't heated very well. And the only things I remember seeing for sale in that entire department store were thick, heavy sweatpants, which were great quality, and like nail clippers and pocket knives, and I mean, just a weird selection of things. And then you look at China today, and it's completely transformed. So.
What do you think some of the key drivers for, like, is that ingrained in the culture? Was there an evolution of how they thought? Was it just playing the long game and things coming together?
Oh, I mean, I don't think it's simple. I think it's really complicated. I think there's a drive, and there always has been the word China, 中国, means center of the earth, center of the world, center country, like center of everything. So China's always viewed itself as superior to everybody else in the world. And, their drive to be successful um, is extraordinary. And, the transformation that happened through the Communist Party, and then all the transitions from Mao to, Deng to, the current environment. It's a billion people. It's hard to rule a billion people, and it's huge. And you've got rural areas, you've got coastal areas, you've got, you know, it's a big job. So, they've got a lot of really smart people working really hard. So I can't pin it down to one thing.
You started there. There was this like culmination of opportunity that kind of happened at one point, and you were in the right position, and then you had an experience that was probably unlike what most people coming right out of grad school or something like that have.
Yeah.
So
Then what
wrap that.
happened? Right.
Yeah. So you spent a couple of years doing that and agreements and charting new territory, and then what did you do?
And then I realized I was not cut out for government. So the thing about
Interesting.
government is you are executing what somebody else's policy is. And I wanted to be the one setting the policy. I wanted to be the one driving it. And so, I realized that I wasn't going to get there from here, which is where I was at that point. So I tried to get a job doing something else. And at that time, I was only offered jobs really that were more secretarial than anything else.
Hmm.
So this was like in 1980. two, and which is people say that's unbelievable. But, women were not so looked on so favorably in the workforce at that time. And so I asked my brother what I should do, and he said, go to business school. But only go if you can get into one of these three schools. So I applied to the three, and I got into one, and well, actually got into two. But, um, you know, and then I went to, I went, and I came out of business school, and of course, people could understand my background then because I had an MBA from a prestigious school, and I spoke Chinese, right?
Yeah.
So.
And you understood the culture, and you were on the forefront of
Yeah,
negotiating
but nobody,
contracts.
but at that time, international was not an important part of most corporations' view.
Hmm.
So I really had to do a lot of work to find an organization that was willing to let me get into that international thing because most U.S. large multinationals at that point really thought that international was like something on the side. It wasn't
Hmm.
mainstream. They didn't consider it central to their business. I mean, we're talking 40 years ago. It was a very different world, right?
Yep.
So anyway, so I did get a job. AT&T had just gone through divestiture, and I got a job out with the West Coast operating companies, helping them I was one of six people helping them to start up an international division. So there you go. So
That's awesome.
it was amazing, right?
And so it sounds like they understood that this might go from side project to a core focus, and six people to me sounds like a tiger team of like, hey, we have a vision, there's an opportunity over here. Hey, you six seem like brilliant people. Go figure this out. Was that the general mandate or
Well, maybe, but I don't know. No, I mean, it was the year because, AT&T had just gone through divestiture. So you had these 7 regional operating companies. So,
Mhm.
the biggest issue was how do we take a regulated monopoly and turn it into a company, right? That was the
Yeah.
biggest issue facing them. So that they had this small international group, I don't know. I mean, I wasn't I didn't have a view into the strategic direction at that level. I was just grateful that they gave me a job. One of my other business school classmates, he had all of Latin America. So, I mean, they were not, so I mean,
That's
when I look back on it, we can smile on that, but it was an amazing position to be in at that point in time, so, uh, we did the first international deal in China. We did as a design, engineering, and planning thing project in Yunnan province. I mean, it was pretty amazing. So
was this like you saw the relationships and the network and a lot of things that you experienced before, and kind of leaning into that, or were these things set up, and you were taking more of your MBA approach of like, this is how we should set all of these things up.
absolutely the former, not the latter. I mean,
Yeah.
what I understood was, you know, working in a centrally planned economy is a complex series of relationships, and nothing is ever what it seems to be. And there's a way of speaking in Chinese which is very polite. And unless you understand how to decode that politeness, you'll never understand what people are really saying. And I mean, there's so many jokes that those of us in the field had about, how to interpret somebody's name card, for example. I mean, it's just, it just became part of it. So that served me really, really well in identifying where there could be opportunities and how to frame those opportunities and then bring something actually to fruition, which was remarkable at the time.
And not to go too far back, but I think about, can I say the school name, just because we were kind
Sure.
of Stanford, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. So what's interesting is, I talk to a lot of people that are transitioning out of active duty service, and they're trying to figure out what they want to do next. And for some reason, like the playbook in there is go to a B school. And one of the things I talk about is like, you can go for the network, or you can go for like the exposure to business. You're going to pay a lot for the network. Generally, like a lot of the information that you're getting is the same. When you went through business school, like, did it open up as far as like kind of like pragmatic problem solving, or were these things that you kind of already had, and it was bringing kind of that business universe together based upon the things that you had already done until that point?
So I would say business school did two things for me. One, it gave me an extraordinary vocabulary. I hadn't studied business, I didn't know the words. So I felt after business school, I could walk into any meeting and listen and ask intelligent questions. That's all, and because I didn't have the vocabulary to understand a lot of what was going on. But business school gave me that vocabulary, and it was a very important vocabulary to have because it's how people communicate in business. So, it's
Yeah.
a good one. It's like a language. It was a foreign language for me, right? It opened up my view of possibilities because I learned about things that I never knew even existed. Right? I didn't have exposure to them. I didn't. I mean, things like Apple were just getting started. I mean, when I was there, again, this was long ago. I mean, I remember I had put together an international speakers forum when I was at Stanford as a student. And so invited John Scully, who was just coming on as the CEO of Apple. And so, Steve comes with John, to do this talk to the students, or, former Secretary of Treasury, Mike Blumenthal, they come. So being at a place like Stanford, as a student, I got to invite these people who were, really, um, very knowledgeable and informative, and I couldn't have gotten that exposure probably unless not being at a school that had that type of reputation. So that was important, and it did give me, looking forward, not looking backwards, but looking forward, the network I formed amongst my classmates was invaluable.
Mm.
Not about people who went there before, but about the people who I was there with, because they're unbelievably smart and talented and nice, and you know they're good folks. So those would be the two things. I mean, I just think the vocabulary and you know and access.
And then so you came out of that and then got right into the divestiture, took over the planning and the negotiation and deal making, the first one that was happening in China at the time. And
Yeah.
then you departed, and this is before you decided to hang your own shingle, but there was kind of an in between. What was that?
Well, so after I left the Pacific Telesis, I went to work at AIG had invested in a small consulting company. And so I went to New York to work in that company to help them develop their consulting practice. And so I did that for a couple of years. And that's what I did before I started my own. So,
And so basically you took a look around and you're like, why just help them get to, like, why can't I do this? Was that kind of the spark? You're just like, let's do it.
yeah, well, it wasn't, I mean, actually, I mean, that would have been a nice view. I mean, it's true. I thought, why couldn't I do this? Yes, I could. But I mean, I thought, well, it'd be nice. I had worked for the vice chairman of, a very large corporation in Pacific Telesis. Well, there was the president of the international, and then he reported to the vice chairman. But I was at a very high level, right? And then at AIG, I had direct contact to the CEO. So I was not in middle management, So I think I started my own company because I couldn't go to middle management. you
Yep. I could see that. And that's like, this almost gets back to your personality though, because when you were talking about, like, you are an activist, like you were out there, and like when you saw something, you said something, and eventually it all called up to you because you're just like, I'm just going to do this myself.
Right. Right. So I just called everybody I know. I said, "Hey, is there anything I can do for you?" And I got super lucky. One person who had heard me speak um, at a conference said, "Okay," and that was with the Coors Brewing Company. They had an interest that was something that had to do with China, and And then I was off to the races. So there you go.
I talk to consultants constantly, and it's like, oh, where do I, do I go to the BNI event? Do I get a speaking thing at this thing? You're just like, you know what, Coors Light or Coors, pick me up because they saw it. But you, like, this gets back to the intersection of like, you came in, like the timing, you had the skills, like you had it all, and that stuff was moving, and then it was just like it
Yeah,
feels like
there.
you could
Yeah.
go anywhere.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, exactly. As
Huh.
long as you're willing to work really hard. So,
Yeah.
I mean, we can laugh about, but let me tell you, starting a company was a 24/7, 365. I remember my first year in business and I was hustling, let me tell you, because you can't differentiate between what's a good opportunity and what's not a good opportunity, right? You've got to pursue them all because you don't know which one's going to come through.
The company that you grew and scaled, but was this you involved in, or very involved, or managing all of the projects, or is this something where you're like, now we've got 10 Fortune
Well,
100?
I mean, originally, for the first probably year or two, yeah, absolutely. But then I brought in somebody. I hired him away from. He came from London to take over as a role, and then, I had 26 people, so I was not managing. Trust me, in the end, I was not managing much except the people. I was working with clients on delivery. I mean, it was a typical consulting company structure, right? So I was sometimes the face of it, but the real work was being done by some incredibly talented, hardworking people who loved what they were doing. So, because it was fun. I mean, you had to love working in China. It was not for people who wanted to be in a five-star hotel.
Yeah. Yes. Um,
So.
Same with the military, by the way. Yeah. What So when you started this, like, was your vision of like, I want to grow and scale a meaningful organization that has a maximum impact and influence in societies and bringing together these things, or were you just like, hey, I'm fed up and I'm not going to middle management, therefore, like, we'll just see.
I mean, I just felt there was such a lack of understanding um, among U.S. business people about China, and I just I didn't think they got it. I think there were a lot of assumptions that people who were Chinese American had some special knowledge of China, which I didn't experience that. It's because they were ethnically Chinese. They didn't mean they understood anything that was going on in the country. And I had had this opportunity to be exposed in these very formative years as, there were used to be seven entities in China that could that could have contact with a foreigner, right? So I saw it from that to, explosion. And I was able to look below the surface, and I felt I had an ability to really add value, and I wanted to add value.
Hmm.
Um, and and so the name of the company was Pacific Rim Resources. So it was not going to be tied to me. It was going to be tied to people who really got it, and enjoyed doing that kind of work. So
This is kind of a spoiler question, but were you, as you were growing and scaling the company, were you in a peer group?
no.
No, no peer, no
I,
peer
I,
group.
I, I always laugh about that because I remember, I used to always get these letters from people, from organizations that would say, hey, come to this whatever event. And I would think to myself, I'd roll my eyes and I'd go, oh my God, who has time for that?
Yeah.
So, um, I look back on it now, and I sold my business when my daughter was little. And I just, had made the decision that I could have gotten a nanny full time or I could do something else. And I think that if I had been in a peer group, that they would have really pushed and challenged me before I had my daughter to really think through what would have worked and to structure things differently. So, you know, my path is fine. I love it. I've been chairing for 23 years now. So, it's all good, right? But life might have looked very different had I been in a peer group, but I wasn't. Yeah.
When you talked about selling the company, like was this a was someone just in the market? You like made a decision and it's like, hey, I'm going to sell this, and therefore there's like I already know who the buyers are. Like, how did you
So
think about that
I
process?
had had a couple of large consultancies reach out to me, and a couple of very large consultancies were my clients because
Hmm.
nobody knew what was going on in China then. I mean, we knew what was going on in China. They didn't. So, we had some very, blue chip, mainstream, big name consulting clients as our clients, and we had uh, companies look at us to acquire us. And I realized that, I thought about what would I gain and what would I give up if I were acquired in that way? And I realized, what I would give up was all the autonomy and all the flexibility that I wanted, because now we would just be the people who would be fulfilling the consulting assignments
Yeah.
for these other brand names, right? And I decided that, it wasn't the direction I wanted, but there was a competitive firm to ours, and the guy who ran that firm, he was based in Beijing, and we had like some of the same clients. So they do a project, we do a project, they do a project, we do a project. So I knew his work, and a mutual friend in Beijing, suggested we talk, and he had decided he didn't want to leave China
Hmm.
for personal reasons. And so it worked for him and it worked for me, and it was just lucky, so it was a transition over multiple years, but that's how it worked. Went
Yeah.
down. And so I got what I needed and he got what he needed, and it really, and yeah, and just a wonderful guy. So really honest, upright. Couldn't have had a better transition. So
Which you obviously know after being at Vistage for 23 years, and me just from hearing all the horror stories. Like that is unique a
right.
unique execution of acquisition where everybody walks away happy, smiling, and still best friends today.
Yeah, yeah, it is. I mean, I know that from, I mean, I can't tell you how many of my members have been acquired by private equity and their firms no longer exist because the private equity bankrupted them. So,
Yes.
so there's a lot of sad stories and a lot of missed expectations. And I think what we did right, um, is we really spent a lot of time talking, about, well, one, we knew the quality of work that we needed to do, right? So because we had seen each other's work, so we really understood how I understood how he worked, he understood how my firm worked, so that there was that understanding, and took the time to really introduce the people to each other who would be required, because he was based in Beijing,
Mhm.
and I had been based in San Francisco. So I had somebody else running my office in Shanghai, and that kind of stuff. So we took our time, but it worked. It did
Hmm.
work. Um,
When you hear a group member in a CE group that's considering going down the M&A path or something like that, like do you have like advice that you give them based upon the success that you had? Maybe it was like having the teams meet early on, or the culture fit, or whatever it was where you thought that magic was.
I think, I mean, the biggest thing I encourage people to do is to be strategic, because what I find in the current environment is a lot of these companies are approached by people who say, "Hey, I want to acquire you," or "Hey, this," and they're very flattered, and so then they're trying to, they have this vision of what could possibly happen, and I I encourage them to strategically look at their own business and determine, what are the possible outcomes that they want in their company, and and really define what they need and they want, before entering into even those conversations, because
Hmm.
it's so flattering. Hey, I want to buy you. Oh,
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah. speaking of flattering, so we were, my last company was called Hunt to Killer. It was the first ever immersive murder mystery that we delivered directly to doorsteps. It had clues, items, correspondence. We grew very fast. And then eventually we were able to get into retail. So we grew the company via direct consumer. We just sold the subscription online. And we got into Target and Amazon. And within 6 months, Hasbro called. And we're like mid-pandemic at this point. And so we're like, there's a lot of things that are happening. And for, the gigantic Hasbro to call us, like, we were flattered and everything else. What we did not do was exactly what you just said, which is like, first understand, like, what do we want? What are we trying to accomplish? And ultimately, I can't speak to too many details, but just made a mess of the whole thing. So anyhow, long-winded, like, hear you there. And emotions get wrapped up really quick in these types of things. So,
all right, quick break, friends. Do you find it impossible to hire and retain top sales talent? Or worse, are you paying insane recruiter fees who are all using outdated hiring processes? Yeah, I was too. At Hunt to Killer, we were spending hundreds of thousands on recruiter agency fees. And after I sold that company in 2025, I started Talent Harbor. And the whole vision here was to make sales recruiting accessible to small and medium-sized businesses, because the organizations that can hire and retain world-class people are the ones that ultimately win. Most organizations rely on things like ZipRecruiter or LinkedIn, and they get hundreds, if not thousands, of resumes. But we find that the best salespeople are already perfectly placed somewhere else. And that's why our approach is to go after them. And we do that through a business model called recruiting as a service. We do not charge commissions. We do not have success fees. We don't have contracts. We don't have long-term engagements. And we become an extension of your team as expert sales recruiters. If you're tired of the same old recruiters and want to actually grow your sales team, check us out at talentharbor.com. That's Talent Harbor, TALENTHARBOR.com. Let's get your next sales superstar hired.
So we sold the company, which went amazing. And you were just like, I wasn't in a peer group. I should have been in a peer group. Therefore, I'm going to go lead peer. Like, how did?
No, are you kidding?
how?
So I had a young child. She was then about 2 years old, maybe 2.5 years old. And I was on the board of the Bombay Company, which was a New York Stock Exchange company. And I was also on the board of a small Hong Kong investment firm. So I thought that would be plenty for about 3 months. Because first of all, I just needed to sleep. And 3 months into it, I was like, wait a minute, this is not quite enough. And so I just, when I had been in the process of selling my company, actually, a guy who is a Vistage Chair still, he had come to see if I would be interested in joining his group. It was called Tech then. And I said, hey, not really. I'm just about to sell my company. But he said, well, you'd be good at doing what I do. Why don't you come do this? And I thought, but, but after everything settled down, I started looking into it. And it was a couple of years before I actually decided to do the first chair training at Vistage, because I just was busy doing other things. And it was actually nice, not being totally busy all the time.
Yep.
And so I went to the first training and I thought, I don't know, maybe the chair training was kind of different then than it is now, because I, still had other things I was doing. And then I went to a second chair training and I was like, oh, okay. I was, and,
I love it.
well, I don't know. Yeah. But, the criteria, what Tech then, now Vistage, requires you, before you did the third training, you had to actually put together a group. So I went to my Rolodex. Okay, do we know what year it is, right? And I had sold large consulting projects to CEOs of very large companies. So I really believed I could have the conversations with CEOs to give them confidence that a peer group would be useful and helpful. And lucky for me, I was, and I was able to start one fairly quickly. But what I learned was that I knew how to be a really good consultant. And that's very different than being a coach and facilitator. And so I've had a development and learning journey in my career as a chair is to how to be a coach and facilitator as opposed to a really good consultant. So,
Like I understand the shift from like consultant probably trying to solve all the problems to coaching. Like what was kind of that fundamental shift or different things that you started doing?
as a consultant, I had to always listen deeply, but people didn't have to share very much before I believed I understood how to solve the problem. And I think that I've really honed in my listening skills and listening deeply. And a lot of times I hear things in what people say that they don't hear themselves saying. So a lot of times I'll say back to someone what I heard them say in my own words and ask them if they got it, I got it right or not, right? Did I get it right? But that's a very powerful thing because they didn't even know they said it. Right? So it's a very powerful thing. So the listening is really important. And then asking questions that really help people to focus on what they may not see themselves. We all have these major blind spots, right? So I can see it, you can't see it. What's the question I could ask you to maybe help you kind of even know that you don't see it, right? Because we don't know what we don't know, right?
Yeah.
It's one of those things, I don't know what we don't know.
Do you see a lot of like the core issues come back to similar themes? And I'm sure that depends. I'm trying to think because maybe they're not all business problems, but when you're digging in, is it like it 80% of the time it's a people problem, or 80% of the time it's a product or process problem? Like, do you see consistent themes, or is it open questions or open-ended questions and open-mindedness to see where this journey takes us together as a coach?
I think it's the latter more than the former. I've gone through what I would call different periods of the economy. And so depending on what's going on in the external environment, sometimes really drives some of the internal issues within a company. So 2003, when I started on this journey, it was just after the dot-com bust, right? So there was all this recovery going in. Then you got into 2008 and you've got the financial crisis, and then there's liquidities of, there's different kind of issues that are real issues. So I think it's there's always going to be, or there's often people issues, but I wouldn't say that when I think now about it, they're not they're management issues rather than people issues. So it's holding people accountable. It's goal setting. It's organizations that have developed a discipline around communication. There's just so many things internally. Clarity. One of the biggest things, from my perspective for a CEO is clearly communicating what is it that we're doing and what's the end game here, right? So that everybody in the company can contribute to getting to that end game. Right? So, and then, and also the speed of change, right? Things have accelerated so much. And, how do you stay strategic? That's kind of the end of the question. How do you stay strategic?
Like, there it
but
is.
I was just thinking, specifically like with AI right now, like people are being just bombarded by this, solution and that solution, and this can do this faster and that can do this. But how are you strategic? What's strategic about AI for your organization? Not what tools do you use, right?
Hmm.
So I just think that, no, I mean, I think the questions change. I don't think the questions are the same. And also, it really depends on the type of organization that people are in. So I think it's very different in like a generational family business where you have, a business where maybe one generation is taken over from the next, and they could be, large companies. They could be $1 billion, but there's still family businesses. And then there's that dynamic to deal with and all the things. And then you have a hired gun in a privately held company, right? And his or her issues are again really different, and a lot of times those are managing board management issues, right? So how do you manage your board? And the same with like a venture invested business. It's around not just execution of your team, but it's around you got these other people there. So you know it depends. Right? And I was going to say the one thing that's really interesting is, the people who are in the Vistage group, like they may be running now a family business, but they may have come out of a large corporate environment and had global experience. And so they bring all that to the conversation for somebody who may be, now in that situation. So it's not, there's a lot of wisdom in the room. So it's kind of cool.
That's awesome. One of the things I was going to say is where were you 5 or 6 years ago? We raised money, and I had no idea what I was getting myself into with the board dynamic. Like I got a crash course in real time, mostly on what not to do. That's a story for coffee or beers later.
Yeah,
Um,
right.
when you think about AI, so I agree with you. Like the bombardment, like every time I look at something or see something, like it's like somebody selling a new AI tool. Maybe it's not even theirs, but they're just making their top 10 list, and like you got to have this and all these different things. And it kind of reminds me of maybe like 15ish years ago, 20 years ago, and like when from an e-commerce standpoint, like all of these companies were selling us different software solutions. So not necessarily AI, but more of the SaaS space. And what I realized was like the platforms, not that they came and went, but like they all like solved something, but it was always like the underlying like core thing that the business needed to do, and finding the right solution, sure. But I found it very much a distraction from like what we were trying to accomplish as a business.
Mhm.
How do you consult business leaders on this as like they're getting bombarded on all of these things? Like are you like, hey, you need to be on the bleeding edge because like if you don't start adopting all of this stuff, you're going to be behind the game? Or like how do you look at AI and where we're at with innovation?
Well, I mean, I think that AI and innovation are two different things. AI is a tool, and it's evolving all the time, and and there's many different AI tools that can be useful, um, but it's a tool. Um, Innovation is around creativity and thinking, which I don't, that's to me, AI can be a tool in that process, but innovation is innovation. And, there is so much in technology, and I think it's, depending on the scale and size of the organization, it's either realistic or unrealistic to expect the CEO to be knowledgeable about the tech stack an organization uses and how to integrate it. I mean, really, that's, wait, and organizations need a tech stack. So it's not like they don't. I mean, small and medium-sized businesses need to um, keep abreast of technology because their customers will demand it, or their customers will go elsewhere,
Yep.
right? Or because either their costs will be higher because they can't do things as quickly, they can't get the information, whatever the reasons. So you need to have technology. But in larger organizations, you have a CTO and a CIO, and you have all these roles. And um, in a small organization, if you don't have it internally, you need to be outsourcing that. And there's many entities which will do that for you, but you need to have someone who's really paying attention. Um, And, it can be external to the company if you don't need it full time.
Love it. Love it. We talked about this a little bit about how much stuff is going on right now. So like not just AI, but tariffs. So a lot of like my community, my network is in the consumer product space. And so every time they turn around, it's whiplash. There's another tariff, there's another this. And like they're chasing
Right.
refunds with their right hand, and on their left hand, they're paying more tariffs with this new thing because who knows what's going on.
Right.
Like when you see this like chaos happening, like how do you help your members through that? Like, is it like, hey, time out, pause, let's prioritize like the things that can impact us the biggest? Like, how do you help with the thought process there?
It's a great question. I mean, to me, it's all around planning with uncertainty. So I would sort of take, I mean, you could put AI into it, you could put tariffs into it, you could put the war into it, which war, pick your war.
Yeah. Oof.
You
I'm,
put oil prices into
yeah.
it. I mean, there's always going to be uncertainty. And so I think it's around figuring out how do you plan with assumed uncertainty. And it's not easy. And I know that for, some of the CEOs that I work with who do a lot of, a lot of their supplies comes from outside the United States for, products, that's meant having to, create multiple locations for sourcing products. That's another thing, you really need to look at. And I don't like to use this word dynamic pricing, but it's almost, a certain level of transparency around pricing. If you've got huge variability in, in commodity prices. And so, um, I don't think there's a, one fits all. I think it's how do we manage a business when we can expect there's always going to be uncertainty? So what do we have to build into our own model to be flexible around? And I think it's going to be different, in CPG, depends where you're producing, right? Depends what your inputs are, depends where your market is, right? So, um, but just really to think that through. Do you have to charge people differently based on, if you're making baked goods and the price of eggs go up, what does that mean?
Yeah. And it's so tough out there. Like I just think back, I'm not in the consumer space anymore. But I think back to the pandemic when everything was going on, and like one week our warehouse and distribution was going to get shut down by the state of Maryland. And then the next week it's like, okay. And we went from about to move all of our supplies to this other warehouse that happened to have healthcare supplies. So that way, like we knew that the facility was yeah, it's a challenging world out there.
I mean, it's hard. I mean, it's not, it's hard.
Yeah.
It's all hard, right?
Yep.
It's all hard.
So one of the things that we realize with the audience is there's a lot of Vistage chairs that listen, and it's for two reasons. They tell us, number one, like they love hearing the founding story, the journey of other Vistage chairs, and the second is like the keys to success. And you talked about this a little bit, this idea of like when you got into Vistage, you had a Rolodex, you called everybody up, and you started to form your groups. A two-parter here. Number one, like if someone doesn't have a huge network, like what would your recommendation to them be to like getting started and getting the groups together? And then two, there's much more to it than that. You've been doing this there was no fluke in this. Like, if you got the group together, great, but that doesn't necessarily mean you'd be doing this for 23 years. And the fact that you have means that you've had success.
Yes, I have very good retention.
Yes. And so like, that's the whole other side to this. So I guess like just speaking a little bit on those 2 points, like number one, like what's your piece of advice for people that are just getting started? And then number two, like, how are you so successful?
Boy, those are two big questions. So, there's been such an emphasis on doing things through LinkedIn. And I don't know how that works because that's not what I've used, right? So I have every year for as long as I can remember, once a year, I'll put together a CEO speaker workshop, and I would invite people to come in person and have an experience. So come for 2.5 hours and check it out. Because I don't invite people into the group. So a lot of people, I mean, I'm really, I know I don't do necessarily what Vistage recommends. So I'm a little shy here, but it works for me.
Yeah.
So because I don't invite people to come and hear speakers, because for me that's too disruptive. I mean, the time in the group for me is sacred. And I just think that, members are taking their time to show up, and to have people come in to check it out who may not be serious. I don't want to take the time to do that. And I did that probably early on, and I realized how much time it took away from the core of what we were there to do, which was really to support each other, making better decisions and having better outcomes. Um, and so I think treating the meeting almost as a sacred space and fun.
Yeah.
Fun, not heavy, just fun.
Yeah.
Where this is the place that people can come, and it's safe, and they can say whatever they need to say, and there's some. I had a retreat meeting this past weekend, and wouldn't you know, somebody started crying, even though there were spouses there. And so one of the members in the room said, "Well, I guess it's a real meeting. Somebody cried." So,
Yep.
and it's a safe space to do that. It's okay. Because, people who are in leadership roles carry so much on their shoulders. And so I think that, really having people believe they can be honest and open and get really good feedback on whatever the issue, whether it's professional or personal, is really critical. That to me is what makes sustaining the group interesting, and that for me is what has given me the opportunity to continue to learn and develop myself as a chair. And as to building the group, June 2nd, I've got an in-person event in San Francisco. Anybody who wants to come, get in touch with me. I'd delighted to invite you at 11:30 to 2. But it's a once a year, and it's a once a year thing. That's worked for me. But I know that I think that the hardest thing for a lot of people is reaching out to their personal networks in the beginning, because everybody has a personal network, but they're essentially doing a career change. And I remember he actually became a member, which was incredible. One of my founding members, who I knew from another context. I was a China person, right? And I was known as China. And I was San Francisco and Shanghai were sister cities. And I was on I had all these connections, right? So I sat down with him and I started talking at him about what this tech group was going to do for him. And he looked at me and said, "Julie, would you let me talk?"
I love it.
And I learned a lot from that. So but he was great, because what I learned was that I was afraid to reach out to my personal network, because my persona was, I was going to be just in such a different position. I was a neophyte. I was just learning. I was starting out. I was no longer the expert. I was no longer the, that figure. And so I just encourage people to reach out to their own networks and get a sense of that you can do this. Whoever you are, whatever your background, you can do this. And you are equal to the person sitting across the table, but you don't have to look backwards at what you did do. You just look forward.
There's so much packed in there, like especially when you talk about the sacred. So Ed Robinson was my first chair about 8 or 9 years ago now, and I'd moved from Baltimore to Seattle, so it was Tom Leonard, and then Thomas, and then back to Tom Leonard. I put someone on my board that was in, and so there was a conflict, so I had to move groups. And then today I'm in Gary Bringlass's group down here in LA. One thing that I remember about Ed and kind of that sacred space is like he gave us ownership over the group. And so like not just like the no outsiders, but like everybody had to give a thumbs up. And not that, 15 members had the opportunity to like interview and take each individual out to lunch, but like we nominated some folks, and anybody that wanted to talk to a new member, like we had a voice in all
Yeah,
of
no,
this.
I mean, I don't do that. I mean, anybody who I give a thumbs up
Yeah,
to, they then have to talk to a member of the group before we invite them into the group.
I love
So,
that.
yeah, I don't do the whole group. And then that member of the group is the person who then gives the thumbs up to the rest of the group.
Yep.
So,
I,
yeah, so it's not my group anymore.
I love that. I love that. Like, and that speaks to the like the sacredness of like not just bringing. I think a big part or core of what you were talking about was like, bringing people in that could distract from the things that are going on, and the sacredness of the group, and we're there to solve problems and grow together. And then also, giving ownership to folks. I think that's awesome. Okay, last two questions, and these are very simple. So number one, someone's in the you also have a virtual group, so maybe we could talk about that for a second. But let's just say someone's looking for a group and they just listened to this. What do you look for in new members?
I mean, it depends, but I think that, after they've been in my groups for 6 to 12 months, they should have an ability to listen. And I think some people come in and that's their learning opportunity, right? Is to listen. But listening is really important. And a willingness to bring their gifts, to share their gifts, because people have experience. If people are running a business, they have experience that's valuable, and everybody's got a different path to get there. So, sharing what they've learned. Um, and I mean, I think that, well, if they're in a group with me, they have to be comfortable with me telling them to sit down and shut up because, I do that.
I love that. Oh, it's how you run shop.
It's just how, well, I mean, they have to be comfortable because, I mean, it's, people laugh, but it's easy for a CEO to start talking and not stop. So
I thought that was a perfect pause before the next one. Okay, and then so someone just listened to this. What's the best way for them to get a hold of you? And it also sounds like you've got an event coming up first week of June.
yeah, yeah. And I also have an online group, right? So it's probably julie.reinganum@vistagechair.com. I mean that, or they could contact me on LinkedIn. There is only one Julie Reinganum in the world. So it's,
Only one.
it's pretty easy to find me. And if you don't find me, you find one of my siblings or nieces or nephews. It's pretty, it's pretty easy.
Love it.
So that's pretty easy. And there is this event on June 2nd, and it's in San Francisco, 11:30 to 2. And if someone is interested, I would love to have a conversation with them. And assuming they're qualified, I'd love to invite them to come. That would be great. And then that's the best way. And I mean, you touched on the online group. So about 15 years ago, Vistage had decided to do an online product. It was called Vistage Connect. And I was one of the people who did that, and it's an online group. Except for myself, all of those groups have gone away, and it's no longer a Vistage product, but I have been grandfathered in, and I still have this group, which is an online group, and we meet 2 hours a month, and then I do an hour of one-on-one coaching. So people who travel a lot, people in different geographies, people who, are more digitally inclined. It's a great option for people who, the content that you get in a Vistage meeting, the speakers, if they're happy to get that in other environments, it's a great choice for them, and they get a more global perspective, and they get a great peer group. So it's a different program. It only meets for 2 hours, and it's online, so we could do it from anywhere.
But how many members do you have in that group?
We've had 8.
Got it.
So it's a smaller group, right? And yeah, yeah,
Do you ever
it's a smaller
do you
group.
ever get them? Now I just have so much personal curiosity in this, selfishly, of course. Is there? Do you guys ever get together in real life, or is it 365?
So, well, we have in the past. I mean, it's been going on now for years, and there have been years when there's been like an executive
Hmm.
summit in San Francisco, and I had a member. He was in Bogota, Colombia. He flew up from that. Another member in Seattle. He flew down. So I mean, we have gotten together as a group. Uh, it's interesting because right now everybody in the group has been in an in-person group. They just prefer this model. So
Huh.
it's
Okay.
for everybody's got a different reason, So
Okay. Julie, thank you so much for taking the time to come on, share your story. Like I knew going into this. I think I told you when we were in the green room. I was like, this is going to be a blast. Just diving into like your journey. What an incredible story, and just all the parts of it, and then all the great work that you do at Vistage. Just want to thank you for that. Vistage, two things changed my life. So my first company bankrupted. Second company, we found product market fit. Two things changed my life: Vistage and EOS, and like those are the only reasons.
those are the
Yeah,
things, right?
it's the
Yeah.
only reason
Yeah.
I didn't bankrupt the second company. So anyhow, thank you so much for taking the time to come on. You were great.
All right. Thanks, Ryan.